All right, we've already seen our array helper methods. What I want to do is walk through a couple of them and really rebuild them from scratch so we can understand how they work under the hood. So if we go to our lesson here, we will see that we went over all these different array helper methods. And the one thing that they had in common, which was fairly difficult to understand, is the fact that each one of these is called an iterator function. So let's talk about what we mean by that. Here's the code that we had for each. And the idea was, as we step through every item in the array, we're going to call a function for the item in the array. So one thing to take note of is all these functions work like that, which is these functions take an argument that's a function, and this function will be called for every item in the array. Now, this may not make sense in the beginning, so let's break it down and walk through it from scratch, basically rebuilding forEach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function called myForEach. And myForEach, I just called it myForEach to make a distinction between the one we're making and the normal one. But in all intents and purposes, it's going to do the same thing. So myForEach is essentially going to take a function as an argument, and it's going to call that function, right? But it's not going to be that simple, right? When is it going to call that function? Well, it's going to call that function for every item that is in the array. So we need to take an array as an argument as well. Now, before I get to actually writing this out, the reason why we need to take an array as an argument, and we don't need to do that for the regular forEach function, is because the regular forEach function gets to be called on an array, right? And we haven't done that yet. We're not actually adding this into the core of JavaScript, but we can do that in a moment. We can refactor it. So I'm going to say for var I equals 0, I is less than, if I can type here, array.length I++. And then for every item in the array, I'm going to invoke this function with that item passed in. So I'm going to say var item equals array I. I'm going to pass this item in here. So what we're saying here is for every item in this array, let's invoke this function with that item passed in. Now, kind of ignoring this for one moment, if we go back here, this syntax, at least in the beginning, is kind of confusing, right? So what we can do is we can take this function and define it, pull it out of here, and define it somewhere else. I could say var log numbers equals function. And then I can pass a reference in here. So the idea for each is that it takes one argument, which is a function that will be called for every item in the array. And now that I've got forEach, I can comment this out. So if I want to use numbers, so let's keep numbers. Comment these things out. And then down here, I can actually call forEach. I'm going to say, myForEach. myForEach, the numbers array, and then my function, right? So in this case, I can keep log numbers and call log numbers. And if I save this, go back to my console, I should see that it does the same thing as forEach. It walks through and logs every number. Now, since this is the way that we actually use forEach, and it looks different from myForEach, I can actually refactor this a little bit to basically call it right on the array. So I'm going to do that. So instead of myForEach taking array as an argument, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to say array, big A array, dot prototype dot forEach. So what this is going to do, if you remember, and it's not important for what we're talking about right here, that we're adding a method to array's prototype. So from here on out, every time I create a new array, it should have the myForEach method added onto it. Now we still need to refer to the array that is being called here, or that this method is being called on, and we can do that through the keyword this, because remember, this refers to the object that invoked the function. In this case, the object that invoked myForEach is numbers, right? It's this array, which again, if you remember, arrays are objects. So numbers invoked my forEach. So this refers to the object that invoked the function. What invoked the my forEach function? The numbers object in this case. So therefore, this refers to the array. So I can say a for loop through whatever this is. And in this case, it's my array. So if I save this, I should be able to look back and see that it does the exact same thing. So we've literally from scratch built the forEach method.